seating afterwards.
Yeah.
That was our payback.
Yeah.
But I still remember making knocks on the door with black flags. It was hunger strike time.
Hunger strike time.
You lived in Foxrock. I was a UCD student.
Yeah.
And we weren't prepared for dialogue is pushing it. It was very blunt.
Yeah.
Please take care and go.
Yeah. Although I got used to that. Curiously, I found at public meetings and a lot of issues, and anger was the main
thing.
Default position. People roared, shouted, insulted you. And I was taking it very personally. And then someone said to me, don't take it personally. And I didn't. And then I felt I could have a few jars with the lads afterwards. And I got to know them. And even if they were still shouting at me, it almost became a bit of a game that you could do it. But it's a tough life, being it, as I say, I was coming from academe.
Yeah.
And from Foxrock.
Yeah.
So it was a tough...
No, I admire you because I've gone on canvas with Cormac Lucy recently in the last 2 years locally in O'Leary.
Yeah.
And knocking on doors, trying to converse with people who don't want to converse. If they answer the door,
right.
you don't need to be sensitive.
That's right. You don't. No.
So I admire you that in terms of resilience.
Yeah.
And the lecturing has been, and politics has been your life. You've progressed through that.
Yeah, I did. I lost my seat in 87. And I only lost it by a few votes. And I lost it, strangely, because of the Irish shipping was being abolished by the government. And a huge number of Irish shipping people lived in the Raheny area. And I had good support there. It's a thing I often regret. I should have voted against the legislation. And I was on the point of it. It was the only time I was ever really going to vote against the party. And in the end, for whatever reason.
Was there a whip then?
Oh, yeah.
So you
I would have lost the whip, but I would have been re-elected.
I mean, it's easy on reflection to say you should have gone against it, but at the time it probably wasn't.
I had everything, or quick decisions. Yeah. And if I had, because they specifically targeted me in Raheny ballot boxes, and I lost by 40 votes. But that's politics. And I often thought of what would have happened, because I would have been elected had I defied the whip. But there you go. I got into the Senate then, and I really enjoyed working there.
15 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that was a joyous, as long as politics can be.
It was, because there's a different atmosphere and a different pace. And I liked looking at legislation and examining it and being able to influence that. But that's, as I say, all good things come to an end. And after the Fianna Fáil devastation of 2002, I was surplus to requirements, quite rightly. As I say, all political careers end in whatever it is. It wasn't tragedy, but I was simply told, you're surplus to requirements. You're not going to win a Dáil seat for us, and we're not running you as a candidate. It was brutal stuff, but it was right. They were right. And they got in Brian Hayes in my place, and he won a seat subsequently and held on to it. So that was 2002. I was very lucky because the government had just set up, under the Good Friday Agreement, the Human Rights Commission. And it was new. Judge Donald Barrington was chair, but just for a year, and they needed a permanent chair. And for some reason, they said they wanted somebody who had both political and common sense. And they thought I had both of those, especially the latter, because there was a danger that it would be taken over by zealots and but that mightn't reflect well on me, that I wasn't seen as a zealot. But anyway, it was Bertie's government, so I was appointed with the support of all parties. And I had 10 years then really setting up the first Human Rights Commission, and that was interesting.
And would you go into politics now? If all things are equal, going back, is that a career you see now somewhere?
Ross, you should ask that question, because I'm often asked for advice by students or by their parents, really, about what they should do. And there are two careers I don't advise people to go into now. One is academe, that most jobs are temporary. They're on fixed-term contracts. And if you're very good, then go for academe and take your chances. But if you're not sort of stellar, it's going to be a tough haul, and you'll be going from one 3 or 2.5 year contract to another and so on. And it's very hard to get a mortgage if you've no
So there's no tenure as such.
There's no tenure.
Okay.
And it's a lot tougher and more difficult. And the other, curiously, is journalism. When I was lecturing, some of my best students, often with my advice, well, not on my advice, but I would have pushed them that way, became journalists. Conor Brady, Stephen Collins, David McCullough, David Davenport, God rest poor
DDP,
yeah. I really liked DDP. But they all became journalists and made good careers. But nowadays, journalists you're not going to get a permanent job, or there are so few of them, and most of them are, you're as good as your last story or your last pod or your last whatever it was. Yeah. So they're different.
Broadcasting has changed, yeah.
And politics is different as well. Politics isn't getting people with life experience, like people who've been in business, or people, say, who's been a doctor and practiced for years, or a solicitor, or somebody who has worked in the real life and then come into politics and bring in that lived experience with them. An awful lot of the people now, if you look at the Dáil, Tim Ryan's great book on the composition of the Dáil and Janet, you see the number of social workers, activists, social activists, party, SPADs, as they're called, advisors. And for the life of me, I can't see why.
Well, nowadays it would be 16 Peter Prendergast. You know what I mean?
That's it.
And in those days, it was one, maybe two.
But they're all coming from very narrow backgrounds, and they're all utterly influenced by what the media would think.
In the same bubble.
And I mean, I think I think Simon Harris is a good example of somebody who listens too much to this sort of thing and should... Maybe I'm unfair to him, but I get that sense. So I think that the pool that people are being drawn from, county councillors are different. They have always a very good knowledge of how the welfare system works, how the local education system works, how local government works, and they bring that in with them. And I remember when I was elected and talking to Joe Lee, the great historian, who's also a senator, and he said to me that when he came in, he had a certain sort of, not contempt, but didn't have great regard for a lot of these fellows, county councillors, heavy men, But then he said, after listening to a few debates, these people knew how legislation would impact on real people.
And how it all worked, yeah.
And that's where he changed his mind completely. And I developed a huge respect for most of the politicians I knew during my time. There were very, very few that I would dislike or have a bit of contempt for. Most of them were really good people. Now, today, you don't get that spread within the Dáil. I mean, if you look around, there are very few people who have made something themselves before coming in. I mean, we had Peter Barry, who had been a successful business, brought in all of that, and many others like that. Yeah. Hugh Coveney, but I can think of quite a few, or even fellows who had their own small businesses and came in and brought that sort of common sense with them.
Yeah, how many beans made six? They've at least been there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is being Irish and Irish that's important to you, Maurice?
It's very hard to define Irishness. And I certainly, in my younger days, I was good at Irish in school and got the gold medal for Irish debate in Rockwell. But I never warmed to it. There was something about the Gaeilgeoir world that was very stultifying, judgmental, narrow, bigoted sort of thing. I think that's changed completely now. I think the Gaelscoil have worked wonders, and that people genuinely are doing what maybe my generation should have been doing. But I was turned away from Irish. I saw it as being, if you wanted certain careers, you went after it. And I thought there was huge hypocrisy about politicians who had 2 sentences of Irish, a Card of Gael, it's more on an or and all of that sort of stuff. So laying down policy, compulsory Irish and so on. So that sort of Irish has never appealed to me. I did always, especially when I was overseas, feel Irish and felt...
But being overseas is a different sense.
There's a different sense of it.
You're kind of released from that.
You're released from that, and I was always astonished at how well liked the Irish were. I mean, you worked in Boston. Yeah. I did as well, worked in the States.
I never did Irish in my life. I lived abroad all my life.
That's right.
So I never learned Irish. I never got that. I found it very repressive when I came back.
Exactly. And I would feel much the same.
Mm.
But there has been a huge, huge revival or